Welcome to Independent Sector's March Monthly Policy Update. I'm Ben Kershaw. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at IS. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time on an IS webinar, welcome. We're a national membership organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure all people living in the United States thrive. As part of our webinar feature, all lines are muted. We will pause periodically for questions. You are welcome to drop them in the Q&A box at your convenience. This webinar will be recorded. It'll be posted on our website and emailed to you next week. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. It's the ancestral home of the Piscataway people who are still in the area. They're working to reclaim their land and their traditional practices. I also want to acknowledge that many of the places we inhabit in Washington, D.C. were built by enslaved people. Wherever you're joining us from, we're really glad to have you with us today. These sorts of policy education events are historically a benefit for independent sector members, but for the last year, we've opened them up to non-members as well to ensure that all of the charitable sectors had access to the latest policy information at a critical time. I see that there are a lot of you with us today, and I hope that means you found this information valuable, critical even, to your ability to best serve your community over the past year. I would love, and we all would love, to see you next month as well. This is the last monthly policy update that we are providing to anyone who wishes to come. So if you want to join us next month, please be in touch with our membership team. If you're not a member, membership@independentsector.org. They'd love to hear from you. Or if you prefer, I would love to hear from you. I'm Ben K@independentsector.org. Maybe the person who asked the best question, maybe we'll give out Wes's cell phone number too, if you want to talk to Wes about joining as well. As I noted, I'm joined today by our partners at Washington Council, Ernst & Young. We're pleased to have Wes Coulam, Jessica Cameron, and Ryan Abraham with us today from the Washington Council team. I'm also joined by my rock-solid government relations partner, Ana Montanez. Usually we turn to Washington Council for a snapshot of what is going on the Hill and what's the latest. Before we do that, I want to pause to talk a little bit about legislation that we discussed in some detail this time last month, but which had not yet been finalized. That legislation, of course, the American Rescue Plan, has since been signed into law. And there are a few things I would want to point out about it. First is that you all should have seen or received our legislative summary of that legislation published in the days before it was signed by the White House. We'll make sure to drop that in the chat. Also want to note that this is an important time to be paying attention to independent sectors, how to access relief resource, which has also been recently updated on our website. So the best source of information for you is those. Certainly the how to access relief tool will continue to be updated. There are a few highlights from the American Rescue Plan that I will just note off the top. Again, the fullest information is in the summaries. The number one of the primary things that we are tracking as a victory in this legislation is finally the expansion of the Paycheck Protection Program for nonprofits to nonprofits that employ no more than 500 employees per physical location. This is not the solution that independent sector and many of our other colleagues ultimately believe is perfect, but it is a significant expansion for high impact nonprofits that have been largely left out for over a year now. So we're very excited about that. The legislation also critically contains significant assistance to state and local governments, $350 billion plus a few other little pots of money for state, local, tribal governments. We believe those funds are important to avoiding budget cuts at the state and local level. And we hope that some of the guardrails put on that funding will encourage state, local, and tribal governments to partner and to invest in their nonprofit community. Lots of other things that are positive in the legislation, lots of things that are left out and that we will continue to fight for. And with that, I want to turn to our partners at Washington Council. So the American Rescue Plan, again, signed into law, but the work is not done. We're in the process of tracking implementation of this legislation, looking for guidance. We have a new SBA administrator. Can you give us a snapshot of how things are evolving and what we should be keeping an eye out for with regards to the American Rescue Plan? Again, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben, and I'll kick things off. So first off, thanks for everyone for being on the call. I see a lot of participants right now, so it's great to see so many people listening in. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we've been seeing and then also what we see on tap for the next few months going forward. So like Ben mentioned, the COVID relief bill was signed into law on March 11th. He did a great job of kind of going through those pieces that affect the nonprofit sector. And I would encourage you to look at that summary document he mentioned and resource tool. There's some great information there. So I won't go into those particular details. But I will say for the COVID relief bill that's important here is that remember that as far as Congress goes, Democrats control both the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so they really have an edge as far as moving legislation forward that'll kind of commit to progressive priorities, to Democratic priorities. That said, and the fact that the COVID relief bill was largely an extension of previous programs like the CARES Act, kind of tweaking different pieces of that for help for different individuals and businesses, we still saw a lot of kind of last minute snags go along the road. And that's important because I'm going to next talk about the infrastructure package that Democrats are hoping to pass this year. And given how the COVID relief bill will happen, a much smaller package and the kind of pieces that were already kind of in the works, it's going to be a little bit more of an uphill battle for what I'm going to talk about next. So moving next, kind of what's the next legislative priority Democrats are hoping to move forward on, and that's their hope of doing a large infrastructure bill. So you'll see things kind of shift now within the next few months. A couple things to note is that there aren't really a whole lot of details. There's a lot that we really don't know about this infrastructure package. Previously, President Biden, along the campaign, as well as the first few months of his presidency, have focused on doing some type of large investment in infrastructure, both in terms of roads and bridges, but also in terms of clean energy and topics that are less likely to be considered infrastructure, but things that are important for communities and for society. So things related to childcare, education, et cetera. But here's what we do know. So at least from the reports that we've been getting, the idea is that there will be some type of infrastructure package that will be made up into two bills. One, as far as the substance goes, the first will be kind of a typical infrastructure bill with what you would consider infrastructure, roads, bridges, clean energy initiatives that the president has been talking about, something along the lines of about $2 trillion, which is a very large package. The idea here is that this would be partially offset with a corporate tax rate increase, or that's at least the hope. The second piece, which I think is more relevant for many of you on this call, is what is being now considered a human infrastructure bill. So think of all the things that you don't necessarily consider infrastructure that will be in here. And that's about $1 trillion, or what we expect to be about $1 trillion. So things including free community college, universal preschool, paid leave. Some of these issues I know maybe Ben and others will talk about later that independent sector has been tracking and are very focused on. Additionally, I should mention there is also, we've heard from Biden during previous press conferences about a COVID equity fund. That's something just to keep in mind and flag. I know that IS is tracking that closely, but that's another kind of piece of this human infrastructure bill. As far as kind of details going forward, we know that Biden will be delivering a speech next Wednesday in Pittsburgh, and that should detail a little bit more about what this plan will look like, what they're hoping to accomplish, and kind of fill in a little more of what we don't know currently. I should note that, remember I talked about how there were snags in the previous COVID relief bill, and we're expected to see, this is a really huge undertaking as far as both infrastructure and this kind of human capital or human infrastructure piece. And so expect there to be delays down the road. We expect that this bill will be passed with something called reconciliation, which allows a lower vote threshold in the Senate for Democrats to be able to pass. With that, there are some pretty specific rules as far as what you can and cannot include in a reconciliation package. And so expect that to be something that these hurdles that Democrats are really going to have to deal with in the next few months. So point is really stay tuned for more developments. I think we're seeing more of what that looks like. And finally, I should mention on infrastructure, as far as timing goes, the hope I think is for at least Democrats are hoping that something will kind of come together, maybe late summer or early fall, that with reconciliation, it requires a budget to be passed. And as a result, that budget will potentially be brought up in the next few months, maybe late spring or early summer. But stay tuned for kind of what that timing looks like. The last thing I'll do before I turn it over to Wes and Ryan is to mention that the president still has to put out a budget for this year. Typically with a new administration, a budget happens a little bit later because they're taking a lot of time to get set up and to staff up their organizations. But the expectation for now is that that will be in the early May time period. That'll be a good indication for many of you on this call as far as what Biden's priorities will be, as far as funding levels and where that funding will be attributed. So with that, I'll stop there and see if Wes and Ryan have anything to add.
The only thing I would add, thanks just for that good summary, is kind of thinking about deadlines or triggers to kind of force action, which obviously something Congress needs to have in order to push through legislation, especially of this magnitude. If they, as it just lays out, the timing here is the president lays out some details next week in a speech in Pittsburgh. His budget comes out, end of this month, first part of May, or April and into May. And we see more of the details kind of come together, what they want to do and how they want to process this next package. The deadlines really are not near. You have the debt limit coming to bear some time in August potentially. That's always a little more flexible, given Treasury can move some things around to move that date. So we're not sure exactly when it is, but we expect sometime in the summer timeframe. They also have the September 30th deadline for the Highway Trust Fund authorization to expire. So looking ahead, I think they want to move the bill quicker than that, but those are kind of the natural deadlines that they have in front of them to force Congress to act on these next packages. And so we're kind of watching to see what happens from the timing standpoint on this. Jessica lays out, you have to do a budget first and kind of lay that out. And so it's going to take some time for them to really process this legislation. There's going to be a lot going into it. I mean, the numbers we're talking about, the last one was 1.9. We're talking about 2 to 3 potentially trillion. And so there's a lot of things that can go into this package as it gets put together the next several months. Ryan has anything to add to that or not?
No, I mean, I think you've really laid it out. I think it's important to emphasize both sort of the timing that both of you have done and then the potential process going forward. I think we're going to know more after the president and vice president get done with kind of the road show on the American Rescue Plan. They're kind of traveling around talking about it, which I think they felt the Obama administration didn't do a very good job of when it came to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So they're talking about it. They're trying to make sure people are aware. I know there's probably some questions, making sure, everyone has the information that they need with all these programs. And I credit Independent Sector for having this great website actually that walks through, in really nice detail, how to find information and has some up-to-date information on some of the new guidance that's being rolled out. So they're out there doing that, but when they get back, there's supposed to be this joint address, this joint session of Congress where Biden's going to likely lay out a lot more of what he's planning to do and how he'd like Congress to move forward. And Jessica is correct, and Wes, to point out there's definitely a path forward, which is the reconciliation path, which is a partisan path. But I don't want to discount, but Biden has said when he came in that he wanted to try to unify the country, but also, the politics of Congress, and with his decades of service, in the Senate, he hopes that he can maybe do that, and maybe, we haven't seen it yet, really, but maybe the first effort on this next package is trying to get 60 votes and do something bipartisan, and that may break down. Maybe that's likely to break down, or they can get something done there, and then maybe we'll see more of the reconciliation path, and agree, with the timing as well that Jessica and Wes have laid out, with this probably more of a later summer, just a lot of committees of jurisdiction, a lot of moving pieces, figuring out if they can get anything bipartisan, and then moving to the next budget, and that whole process is going to take months. But maybe that's not terrible for us to make sure we're getting well positioned for that next legislative push.
So thank you, Ryan. Thank all of you. Let me ask you a little bit more about that, and we may turn back to American Rescue Plan stuff in a minute. But on infrastructure, we're about to see the president release this big proposal. Congress certainly put its imprint on the American Rescue Plan, but a lot of what is in there is driven by the Biden proposal. What sorts of opportunities for sector input, either directly or through legislative champions, do you see, going forward in this process? I know there was a member day hearing this past week. Kind of some fun partisan fireworks went along with that. It certainly doesn't seem like the opportunity for senators and representatives to submit their input is closed yet. What do we think opportunities for input are going to look like on this process?
So two things on this, Ben, and actually, maybe multiple things, right? So first, you have the administration kind of rolling out, beginning next week, their plan. Administration traditionally is more of a big picture, broad strokes type release, and then Congress kind of fills in the legislative details. It's kind of the way it's traditionally been. The administration is to kind of lay out the themes, the policies, the priorities, and then Congress will fill it in. So that's kind of what we expect. And Congress will probably not get ahead of the president until he rolls out his thematic agenda and proposals. And then we'll see the already Speaker Pelosi and Leader McCarthy in the House have already kind of asked their chairman and ranking members of the various committees in the House to kind of develop proposals to fill in the details in the various areas of jurisdiction that they have in their committees. I think the Democrats are kind of proposing, getting their ideas together, and the Republicans are doing the same in the hopes that there will be a bipartisan effort here to work together on a package. And so right now they're still not talking, as I understand it, very close. In some cases they are, but not really across the board. But they're still kind of developing their ideas, what they want to see in the package. And so I think there is, from your standpoint, Ben, I think there's opportunities to kind of weigh into both the Republicans and the Democrats as this gets put together and rolled out. And as Ryan kind of lays out the time, I think we're going to be working at this for several months now. But we don't want to be, once they start developing the policies, we want to be kind of in the game and in the room to kind of figure out what they do and the details. So I think that the time is now over the next several weeks to kind of work with administration and Congress on putting forth our priorities. We think we've begun to do, and people are beginning to do as well on these proposals.
Thank you. So to put a really fine point on this, a question from George Moros. Jessica outlined kind of some of the key themes that are going to be in the president's package, including clean and green energy provisions, including physical infrastructure provisions. There's a rather tailored bill to create a pilot program to give nonprofit organizations specifically small grants to provide energy efficiency upgrades. Amy Klobuchar in the Senate is the lead on that bipartisan bill. Is that the kind of thing you think has a shot at moving forward? I wouldn't expect President Biden to mention it by name in his proposal, but is that the kind of thing that could be one of these details that Congress fills in on the process?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, the idea that that would be a standalone bill and pass on its own, is very unlikely generally, given sort of the mechanisms of debate, particularly in the Senate. They're not going to bring up a standalone bill like that one, but it's very likely that if it's a bipartisan policy, it's the type of legislation that would get pulled into the broader bill. Typically, you look to the number of co-sponsors, you look to whether it's bipartisan, and all those. The more you have of all of that, the better the chance it has. But yeah, Ben, and as Jessica pointed out, I mean, it feels like the climate change, energy resiliency, clean energy angle is going to permeate, this Congress in different ways, and will be part of even things where we might not typically see it, like in a highway bill, where they'll have kind of climate change resiliency building, thinking about, the next superstorm and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know all the details of this policy, and more of a tax nerd myself. But yeah, that would definitely be something that would be put on the table in, when energy comes up in this next infrastructure discussion.
Great, thank you, Ryan. I know you undersell your deep clean energy work on Capitol Hill, even if it was on the tax side. So appreciate your thoughts on that. I also want to flag, turning back to COVID relief and the American Rescue Plan before we turn forward. Yesterday, feels like a while ago, the Senate did clear legislation that we see as kind of a critical bookend to the American Rescue Plan. And this is legislation extending the deadline for the Paycheck Protection Program from the end of this month until the end of May, providing an additional 30 days for SBA processing. So effectively, a 2-month extension plus. That is really, really important, especially for organizations that just gained access to this critical lifeline. It also seems from some of SBA's latest estimates like the funding currently in the program may not take us to May. Washington Council, do you have any thoughts about whether there will be more funding added to this program in advance of the May deadline, assuming they run out sometime in mid-April?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ben. And as you know, the American Rescue Plan did have expansion for nonprofits, 500 or less per location, and for other nonprofits, 300 or less per location. So there is expanded eligibility for the nonprofit sector in this new round. As you mentioned, they gave them a little more time till May, but they did make some comments yesterday in the hearing and during the debate that they thought about $79 billion worth of funding was still in the program as of, I think, early this week. And the estimated that would probably only last them through about mid-April. So the theme here is, if you're going to apply, do it soon, get your paperwork together, talk to your bank, get the application in, and get that processed as soon as you can, given the constraints. If they do more money, it's a good question. That's been very popular. They've replenished it a couple times over the last year, as you know. And so if we get to mid-April and there is a funding, stop, and people are still in the queue to get it, and demand is still there. I think there will be some bipartisan support to possibly enhance it, but I can't say at this point whether that it happens or not. But I think there is been bipartisan support to expand the program, fund it. As you saw in the Senate yesterday, there's bipartisan support from Republicans, Democrats to extend the deadline for it. We'll have to see what happens in mid-April.
So perhaps an extension, but no guarantees. And plus, you don't want to spend your Memorial Day weekend filling out loan applications, right?
That's
so
right.
maybe get it in earlier. One other key COVID relief question. The president has announced a $20 million COVID equity fund that we don't have a whole lot of details on yet, but certainly something we're tracking, given the deep importance of both of those concepts to the work of the independent sector and many of our partners. Do you have any further details that you all can share at this point about that proposal or what we should be looking for?
I don't, other than just with the basics we've heard, thus far, as you already mentioned. We'll see what there's a lot that came through the plan. As Ryan points out, they're now kind of traveling around the country, talking about, the impacts and benefits of the plan. We're going to see the president roll out more details on the next phase next week in Pittsburgh. So maybe we'll see some more details about that coming out next week, but I haven't seen anything definitive yet.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's a rather small dollar amount, so we'll have to see how it, in the grand scheme of things, we'll have to see how it shakes out. Thank you. So I would encourage listeners and viewers to submit further questions through the Q&A function. And thank you to Jessica for joining us. I know Jessica had to jump. We're grateful for her time today. As people continue to think about questions in the Q&A, I mentioned at the beginning that there were things left out of the American Rescue Plan. There are a lot of other issues on the sector's plate, and there are a lot of other issues that are bubbling in Congress of relevance to the sector. And I want to turn now to Ana Montanez for updates on some of those key issues. Thank you, Ana.
Thank you, Ben, and hello, everyone. So I will now provide you a couple of other updates very relevant to the month of March and for nonprofits. Well, at the beginning of the month, the Universal Pandemic Giving Response and Recovery Act, known as UPGRA, roll your R's, was introduced both in the House and the Senate. This legislation may be familiar to you because it was actually introduced at the end of at some point, second year of last Congress. And this legislation would establish a temporary universal charitable deduction up to 1/3 of the standard deduction for years 2021 and 2022. And I want to note that this legislation has had bipartisan support. In the Senate, it was introduced by Senators Langford, Shaheen, Scott, Klobuchar, Coons, Lee, Cortez Matus, and Colling. That's a great group of senators. And the Senate version of the bill is actually S618 for those who are interested in looking it up. And in the House, this effort has been championed by Representative Chris Pappas from New Hampshire and Representative Walorski from Indiana. The House version of the bill is HR 1704. And as you know, this legislation bills over the $300 charitable deduction enacted in the CARES Act that then was expanded until 2020, and also elevated for $600 for those taxpayers who are married and file jointly. So we are very happy to see this effort, coming back to the Hill, and we've been working really hard with these offices, and we'll continue to update you on this. But this is great news for the nonprofit sector. And alongside, according to the latest report from the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, charitable giving actually grew 10.6% in 2020 over 2019. It is very important to note that there has been an increase of small donors and donations. For example, gifts of less than $250 grew by 15.3% over 2019. And the overall number of donors grew by 7.3% over last year. So this is great, and this may be because of the enactment of the $300 charitable deduction included in the CARES Act. So a little bit of good news, but because not everything it's roses and colors in our day-to-day. There's also been reports from the Center for Civil Society Studies at Johns Hopkins University that says that as of February of this year, the nonprofit workforce has remained down by over 926,000 jobs compared to February of 2020. So this isn't shocking. We still have a long way to recover. We are working on it. We have seen in previous reports, this report came out this month, but in previous report, there has been a slightly recovered 2% of the workforce in the nonprofit sector, but we still have a long way to go. And with that, Ben, I conclude my update. I welcome if folks have any questions about this or any other topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I would ask people to put any questions you have on those charitable giving and nonprofit workforce updates. I think that one thing that's striking to me about some of the fundraising effectiveness project numbers we've seen was a 28% increase on December 31st of $300 gifts. When you think about raising the cap from $300 to $4,000, boy, it would have been great. Think of all the great work we could have done with a 28% increase in $4,000 gifts on December 31st. Maybe people just get around to their giving on New Year's Eve, or maybe there's something else at work there. So please do submit questions through the Q&A. We have provided links to both the legislative summary and to kind of more guidance about how to get relief for organizations. And I'll note if folks haven't clicked on it, there's good information in there about the unemployment insurance benefits, as well as the recovery rebates that go out to individuals to the extent they're useful to you or to the communities you serve. We have one question about HR 1, the For the People Act. The question is about independent sector's position on this legislation. And so, I'll say this is quite a large piece of legislation with a lot of moving pieces in it. I think there are a lot of things in that bill that make sense, particularly protections around voting and making sure that everyone's right to vote is protected, and that as we've said in this forum in the past, that no one has to choose between their civil right to vote and their physical safety in a continuing COVID emergency. But that is a huge bill, and we have not taken a position on that. We're not advocating actively on that legislation. I know there's also a question about its outlook, because I know it is quite a closely watched piece of legislation as well. It's passed the House of Representatives. Wes, Ryan, if you have any thoughts on action in the Senate, I think we know it's not going to maybe pass the Senate with 60 votes, but do you have thoughts on the outlook for that legislation in the Senate?
I mean, yeah, nothing other than the Senate is sometimes where bills go to die. and unfortunately, some of the legislation that's going to pass the House this year is just going to struggle to get, to 10 Republicans to support it. But, like we were talking earlier, there may be an opportunity where there's some trading and, this could get into the mix somehow. I don't know. And I will say I'm not tracking this one super closely, but, it's not one that I think is on the fast track, to being put on the Senate calendar. I don't know, Wes,
Thank you.
yeah.
And we had, I think there's a particularly heated hearing pretty recently, right, in the usually rather sedate Senate Rules Committee on this legislation that I think was illustrative of some of the strong passions on both sides of this bill. I think, to the question about outlook, I think it ultimately gets to a question of the filibuster's outlook as well, right? Which is something we could spend a lot of time on today. Ryan, there was also another hearing that you wanted to flag for folks as well of interest.
Yeah, sure. We have, we always stay in close touch with the Senate Finance Committee. One, they're kind of going over their April agenda. And one hearing that I think might be of interest is that they do plan to have a hearing on how the tax code either facilitates or addresses income inequality, but also there's an element of the social justice side, racial inequality, economic and social inequality, and both are there programs that are good that the tax code has in them, and also just are there some simple things that can be done to address inequality. So unclear who the witnesses are going to be, but it's a conversation that the majority staff, the chairman staff, is having with the ranking member staff. So they're trying to, to nail down a date. But staff has let us know that, and they're not trying to keep that quiet or anything. So that's one where maybe there's an opportunity to get our issues front and center as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Ryan.
Just to build upon that, right, as we think about the year looking ahead in the tax policy space, obviously the American Rescue Plan had a big expansion of the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit for lower middle income families and taxpayers. And so that was a big push. But those are temporary, and so there's going to be a push this year to make those provisions wholly or in part permanent, those expansions for lower income individuals, get those refundable tax credits through the tax code. And that's going to be also counterbalanced by, as we've already talked about, how they're going to pay for this bigger package later on this year, which is probably going to focus on higher corporate individual rates. And for nonprofits that have UBTI, the corporate rate is tied to UBTI rates, and so if that goes up, then nonprofits' UBTI rates go up, as well as the impact on giving. If there's a 28% cap, for example, on itemized deductions, it's been in the Obama budget and now been proposed by Biden during the campaign. We'll see if it's in his budget going forward when they release it later this year. But also the theme is going to be about also raising taxes on higher income individuals, whether that's on the rate standpoint or capital gains or both, as well as the estate tax changes that were expanded in 2017 might get ratcheted back a little bit as part of this plan from the Democrats later this year. So those are obviously things to watch as well. It could impact the sector in different ways, and giving and how we're programs are financed going forward.
Thank you, Wes. Yeah, certainly not. We're certainly not only playing offense right now, right? A lot of tax changes that could negatively impact charitable giving as well. We have a question from Mark Turner in Colorado about whether there'll be continued advocacy for self-insuring nonprofits for unemployment insurance. And the short answer to Mark's question is yes, there will be continued advocacy on that issue. We mentioned things that were top sector priorities that did not get done in the American Rescue Plan. Charitable giving being one of them, as we discussed, and this being another key priority. Mark knows this. Mark knows this well, but just to reiterate for other folks, there is a victory in the American Rescue Plan on this issue. A prospective increase from 50% to 75% for not any federal share for nonprofit organizations that do self-insure for unemployment insurance purposes. It is not the 100% we requested. It is not retroactive as we push forth throughout the process, but a cash flow victory nonetheless, one that I think we will continue to push on. There's certainly a lot of work to be done. While we're talking about further work to be done, I should also note, you all have heard us discuss it in the past, the work of the nonprofit Infrastructure Investment Advocacy Group, a coalition that Independent Sector co-founded with Kaboom that has a series of policy priorities for civic and community infrastructure. Hopefully you've seen those in IS communications and on the IS website. There were 6 key areas from that agenda that did receive funding in the American Rescue Plan, and some others that have been telegraphed as areas of potential focus in both the physical infrastructure and the human infrastructure packages that Jessica described and that we expect to hear more about from the Biden administration. So there's tremendous work to be done on issues we've been working on, that all of us have been working on, and the work of the NIAG also, will really be cranking up at this time, and we'd love to share more information about that work with anyone who's interested in working on that and joining as well. I have one question. I know Ryan, you talked a little bit about the climate change focus in what will be part of the president's package. Do you have any more information you can sketch out at this point? Maybe even just what we've seen, kind of talked about in the press about combating climate change?
Yeah. So, again, as sort of the tax nerd, I have a little bit more sense of the direction they might go on the tax side.
Right.
But just starting high level, and as we've been talking about, sort of the 2-part potential effort of trying to do more of the physical infrastructure and climate change being a big part of that. I think what they would think to do is spend some money, and I guess also through the tax code, in the form of tax credits for things like wind energy and solar. Those have various expiration dates and phase outs, to think about extending those. And that's about, decarbonizing the electric grid. So incentives for electricity there. And those would also be on the residential side. Big question, and for the low income community is whether or not an idea to make some of these incentives refundable, or even direct payments, for even on the business side, for even like the nonprofit sector, even as a company could potentially put solar on their rooftops and get a direct payment. But they're more thinking about it as some of these financing structures are not very efficient when you're talking about using the tax equity markets. Anyway, but going back sort of the beginning of so definitely some electricity incentives to encourage clean energy. Also sort of electricity related, but on the vehicle side is electrification. Big emphasis on electric vehicles. Biden put out a pledge to say he wants to have over 500,000 charging stations deployed, ostensibly over the next 10 years or so. How exactly they would accomplish that and partner with the private sector, to do that is unclear. But probably have some tax incentives, for example, to do that as well. And the thinking is they would probably lift the current law cap on the number of vehicles that can claim the electric vehicle tax credit, to go buy a Tesla or other electric vehicles, to encourage deployment of those. So a lot in that space too. And then, the sort of big question is, what about some kind of, carbon pricing or clean energy standard, or sort of a mandate for, for companies and states to meet certain rules? And that one is a little less clear whether or not they'll push that real hard. But it does seem clear that there will be a big energy efficiency element. Whether or not there's a mandate for buildings and others to meet certain standards, that seems unclear. But there's talk that the administration would even build on their own new energy efficient, affordable housing units, if not provide incentives to retrofit existing commercial and residential buildings, which the folks that are working with our membership, they might be able to avail themselves of programs like this. But we're going to see a lot more detail on exactly what they would do. And a lot of this could take the form of loans and grants and other programs that would be fed through, like, Department of Energy. But others may come through the Department of Treasury and the IRS in the form of these tax credits.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ryan. So we have a couple minutes remaining. I think we've certainly gotten some great input and some even greater answers today. I'm not seeing further questions coming in. I know we've had a number of helpful comments as well, and we deeply appreciate those, and we'll take them to heart. As a reminder, this presentation has been recorded, and once we touch up my hair, we'll send out a recording of it to all of you. Who knows how long that hair touch up will take. We will send it out to you next week. Again, thank you all for being with us this afternoon. Thank you for the work you're doing in communities across the country. And thank you for your advocacy. To Washington Council, Anna, thank you as always. Onward, go get them.